area, but rather just use it on a city, right? And somebody asked this morning, why Hiroshima? How come they got picked? How'd they get the short straw in this thing? And a gentleman said this morning, Hiroshima got bombed very little in the midst of the kind of firebombing. So if you pick that city, you can get a sense of the kind of destruction from the bomb itself versus other means of using it. So it really gives you a test case of how devastating and how wide this impact of this particular bomb is for future use of future bombs, right? Additionally, there were some post-war geopolitical considerations. It isn't just only this situation here. The United States, and especially those in the know, they're not dumb. They kind of feel what's coming with the tensions between East and West, between America and Russia or the Soviet Union. And so there are some who say they're going to use and demonstrate this military might or this power to the world to show, especially to the post-war Soviet Union, that we are the new kids in the block and we're not little and we have a military might, so don't mess with us, right? We have the capability of fighting you. You may have lost more men, quite a bit more men, but we have the military capacity, right, to do some serious damage. So let's just kind of like, you know, the big kid, the bully on the block, look at the little guy, and then the little guy comes in and is like, you know, you get these big muscles or something. So the idea here is that with this kind of eye to this kind of Cold War, the idea, and we want to stop the Soviets, right, from their influence, right, of moving from east to west. Additionally, public opinion plays a factor in this as well. The American public, first of all, struggled to get in the war in the first place. We already saw the isolationist sort of mentality, and it's really, of course, Pearl Harbor that brings us into the war, but the Americans are like, look, these are our boys who are losing their lives. These are our sons who are losing their lives. And they're going, Japan attacked us, so let's give it to them, right? Let's show them you will never do this again. And so they deserve this. So there's a kind of public emotional outrage, right, towards the Japanese people. And so the idea of using the bomb as a kind of total victory and to show them what you did to us was uncalled for. And to encourage them to unconditional surrender, right? So there's a lot of debate. Should the United States have demanded unconditional surrender? There's other kinds of surrenders too, remember? There's like, basically, we're going to negotiate what kind of surrender, what this is going to look like. For the Japanese, they're like, we're struggling with this because we love our emperor. We love our emperor. You're not going to tell us what we're going to do with our emperor, right? He has a divine kind of quality status to him. And so we cannot put our emperor into your hands. And so we will fight to bitter death. You will not tell us what we're going to do with our emperor, period. And so there's a little bit of debate is, should the United States have demanded unconditional surrender, that we get to call all the shots, we get to tell you how you move your chess pieces, we get to tell you how you're going to structure your society? Could there have been some negotiation that happened in terms of the kind of surrender that happened? Additionally, there's some debate, as I mentioned. This is one of the most debated and controversial acts in history, without question. Everybody has an opinion on it of whether or not what they think about the use of the atomic bomb. So in terms of history, August 6th, 1945, so this last August was the 80-year anniversary of the atomic bomb. And I just happened to be on vacation at the time, and I was just doing a little bit of reading and research, and just there was so many articles that came out on the atomic bomb and reading them. And I remember reading one of the articles that said, the use of the atomic bomb is immoral, period. And so I brought it up to my family friends that I was with, and I said, this author says this. And the dad in the family, oh my gosh, did he get worked up. He's like, you mean to tell me that guy says this is immoral? I said, yeah, that's what this author is saying. He goes, that's insane. We had to do that. The emotion just kicked in right away, and I was like, whoa. We just up in a live wire here. He got really mad to even consider that there might be some immorality in this, right? So there's just a lot of emotion. And so then it stirred us having a conversation around this thing for about 45 minutes to an hour, going back and forth. And I said, I'm just presenting a different view, right? And so it causes lots of conversation pretty quickly, right? So if you want to like have conversation around your Christmas table, just say, what do you think about the atomic bomb? What are your thoughts? What do you think about the president? What do you think? So what do you think about religion, right? So this is the kind of like throwing a grenade in the middle of the sort of Christmas ham, and there's going to be an opinion on everything, right? So we all know there's certain topics that are just touching a nerve, and people are like, ugh. So and we know as priests, you talked about that? Oh my gosh! Like I can't believe you're still alive, right? So even bringing something like that up to a congregation, right? So we know as human beings, even before you bring it up, there's going to be lots of discussion around certain things. So there has to kind of be a tact around certain things. You guys obviously know the Manhattan Project. I did not see the movie Oppenheimer. I've heard mixed reviews on that as well, right? So it's like there's lots of things around that particular movie. So the Enola Gay, so it's Tibbets, right, is the pilot who dropped that. And he had huge impact, 15 kilotons of TNT. And they think, right off the bat, it killed like 70 to 80,000 people instantaneously. Like within, we're talking nanoseconds, right? And then that death toll increased over 100,000, right? Because of injuries and radiation and the effects of this. So this is a huge thing. This is more than the biggest football stadium we have, right? In the United States of America. By the way, somebody said, what did Tibbets think about it? Sort of, we knew obviously he was okay when he did it, but did he have any change of opinion? He said, no, all the way to the end. He said, this is a very, very good thing. And I watched an interview with Tibbets actually, and he said, yeah, I dropped it, and it was just unbelievable, and I was tired, and on the way home, I got some sleep. I took a nap, right, on the way back. It is what it is, right? We had to do this. So he's very much in the camp of necessary and good and very beneficial and almost heroic. So certainly he's going to have his own particular view. Look at this picture. This is a very famous picture, actually, here, of just the devastation of war. I think Doc will talk a little bit later about teaching history in a way to our kids that's not just fact-based and boring-based, but rather as a narrative, as a story with implications, and how do things arise to get to that point? What are the things we can learn from it? I think also we want to teach war in a way that's not glamorous, but rather in a way to say that war is hell. And we should do everything we can to avoid it, because sometimes with our young people, they have a kind of glamorous view of sort of, it's going to be great and wonderful, and you show them a picture like that and go, are you sure? Are you ready for this? Right? This is all out destruction. War is it's horrific, absolutely horrific. And as so many people have said to me in this course, and we hear this all the time, my dad was in the war, and he never talked about it. My grandpa was in the war, he never talked about it. And you say, why? They couldn't. They couldn't bring themselves to do it based on what they saw. We're talking post-war trauma, the nightmares. Some people say my dad would wake up and he would just be the horrific nightmares that he'd see at the things that he saw or maybe did. And so these are very, very traumatic things that they saw. And it affects them not just during the war, but after the war as well. I'm sure many of you have seen the movie American Sniper. They do a pretty good job of the traumatic sort of syndrome, the PTSD that he has. He has trouble, significant trouble, just engaging with his family and his wife and children. And she's like, where are you? Where are you? Where's my husband? Type of thing. Because of the things that they saw, right? And the things that they did. Second bomb, Fat Man was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. And by the way, this is the sort of epicenter of Catholicism in Japan, right? So Kobe had a monastery, and this is many times where the Catholic sort of heart of Catholicism was in Japan at the time. August 9th, this is 3 days later, 11:02 a.m., plutonium-based implosion-type weapon with a yield of 21 kilotons. So this is even a much more significant blast than the first one, and this boxcar is the bomber. Nagasaki is the second target after the primary target of Kakura was obscured by clouds, leading to widespread devastation and contributing to Japan's unconditional surrender later that month. Could you imagine being on the committees as they are talking about either, after A, are we going to use it, then B, where are we going to use it? So there must have been significant discussion of which cities are going to be hit with these bombs. That's what I just said in the first one there. The second bullet point there, though, 40,000 people were killed instantaneously. By the end of 1945, that death toll reached over 70,000 people. So I'll present reasons for the bomb and then reasons against the bomb. So obviously, first and foremost is for the bomb is we all know that the sort of the lives saved argument is a pretty strong one. United States military planners anticipated a land invasion that would result in hundreds of thousands of American troops and millions of Japanese casualties due to the fierce Japanese resistance, which included the mobilization of their citizens. They wanted to avoid an Okinawa from one end of Japan to another scenario. Remember, they had just had the bloodiest battle in the Pacific in Okinawa that affected not only troops, but the entire island, right, was just devastated by this. So they're saying, okay, do we want an Okinawa from one end to the other in the island of Japan, the mainland? There's Hirohito, their emperor. Japan's military government was deadlocked and just absolutely refused to accept our demand for unconditional surrender that was called for in the Potsdam Declaration, and that was on July 28th, 1945, hoping to negotiate terms that would preserve their government and military structure. And the shock of the new weapons was intended to break the political stalemate and force an immediate acceptance of the terms, right? So you're trying to break the ironclad resolve and will of the Japanese people. They also want to conclude the war, to bring a speedy conclusion to the war. The war in Europe had ended May 8th with VE Day and celebrations, and so they're wanting to bring a couple months later here an end to the totality of the war, VJ Day. And so they want to do this. And so as of that date, naval blockades, the firebombing had not worked to the effect that they wanted to. So they said, we need to do something different. As mentioned, there was a significant, though often debated factor that was the desire to display the immense power of the new weapon to the Soviet Union, the emerging Cold War rival. Using the bomb served as a warning to deter Soviet expansion in the post-war world and give the United States diplomatic leverage over them. This one, I think, to my opinion, personally, is the weakest by far of the arguments to justify the cost. So the Manhattan Project, which is a secret project, of course, to develop the weapons, cost nearly $2 billion. That's a massive, massive sum at the time. And there was internal and political pressure to demonstrate the value of this massive investment. Well, good grief. To kill entire cities because you spent a lot of money, I don't find that to be a very strong argument whatsoever. So many times those who argue for the bomb say it's the least bad option. We're confronted with all these evils. This is the least of the evil options. So in case you're wondering, so there's a prominent Catholic scholar who I respect a lot, George Weigel, who's been around a long time. He's in Baltimore. He's no dummy. He is very, very bright. He knows the church. He knows the sort of political landscape. He knows history. He knows the second. He's got a wonderful mind. I love him. He actually is in this camp, right? He's in this camp of the least bad option, right? And believe me, amongst Catholic scholars, there's a lot of debate in this world against him, right? So they're saying, I love you and I'm with you on so much, but not on this point, right? So it's interesting that Weigel is in this particular camp for the bomb. Reasons against the bomb, obviously the first and foremost one, this is the Elizabeth Anscombe's argument, is the bombings resulted in the deaths not only of military combatants, but also thousands and thousands of innocent civilians, including women and little children, raising a profound ethical question about targeting what we call non-combatants, somebody who's not a soldier. Right? I'm not even a part of the war in some sense. I'm just trying to live my life with my family. And so this would violate humanitarian norms. So when you look at Catholic theology in terms of making a moral decision or evaluating the morality of a particular action, there are, if you think of a fork with 3 prongs on it, you have to look at 3 different factors around that action. The first is the most important, is what's called the object of the act. What are you doing? Not independent of your intention, independent of circumstances. What's the action you're actually doing, carrying out? Not what you say you're doing, you just look at the action itself. It has a language to itself. So the object of the act. The second thing you look at is what's the intention of the subject or the person acting, the person carrying out the act. Is it a good intention? Is it a bad intention? What is it action? And then the third is the circumstances that surround the particular action, which can actually increase the gravity of the evil or goodness of the particular act. That's here. All 3 of those things must be good. All 3 of them must be good. In fact, if any one of them is evil, what my professor would say, it vitiates or it crosses out the act and makes it evil. So you have to look at that. So the challenge here is the object of the act is a little bit tricky on this one, right? It's the destruction of an entire city, both combatants and non-combatants, independent of the results of what you're trying to do. So Anscombe is saying, look, it's just wrong to kill innocent people. I don't care what the results are. You can't kill innocent people. She would say it's an intrinsic evil to kill an innocent human being. All circumstances, period. So that's her major argument. She's got a pretty good argument, frankly. Additionally, this is debatable, there are some who are much smarter than us would say that Japan was clearly on the decline, and they were moving towards this kind of conclusion of surrendering. Now that's debatable, but so there's certain military leaders, Admiral William Leahy, and of course our very own General Eisenhower, they argued that Japan was military defeated already, it's just a matter of time, and the use of the bombs at this point was just simply unnecessary to win the war. He said there were other means that could have been used to win the war and for Japan to surrender. This is his opinion. A naval blockade, right, to kind of pinch out so they would die on the vine, right, they'd wither on the vine. Or he would say the conventional bomb we were using was working. It was definitely decreasing their resolve to fight and force to surrender. Not amongst everybody, but in general. So that's his argument there. Others would argue, say, look, against the bomb would say there were other things we could have done to not use the bomb, but also to get Japan to surrender. For example, I think this is Anscombe's argument as well. She'd say, you didn't have to force them to unconditionally surrender. Like, that you get to call all the shots in terms of how you surrender, when you surrender, and what that's going to look like post-war. There could have been other ways to ask Japan to surrender. Let them keep their emperor, let them have certain things that wouldn't be a threat to us, but there could have been a modification of the way that they surrendered. Additionally, some argued if you would have waited a little bit longer, in fact, Russia was already starting to invade Manchuria, which is at kind of northeast China. you have this kind of vice grip happening on Japan, us coming from the east, and then the Soviets coming from the west. It would have only been a matter of time before Japan would have surrendered. Again, debatable, right? Some people say, no, they wouldn't have. That's all hypothetical. We don't know. Additionally, some argued, why didn't you use the bomb in an unpopulated area, or maybe like on a military target or something, right? Or on a military airstrip or something, to frighten them, right? Or to cause them to surrender without dropping on an innocent city, or just with mass casualties of combatants and non-combatants. The other some arguments here, I'll just briefly go over these, is, as I mentioned, the kind of argument that this was a use of power to the Soviet Union, is we mentioned that. The other thing that's new here is some people argue that, look, it was insufficient time between the two bombings. Like, it's a bit unfair to Japan to bomb them 3 days after the first bomb. You give them no time to sort of have to reflect and to give a chance to come together and say, all right, stop, we don't want to do this anymore. You just use 2 massive bombs on them right in a row, which is really quite unfair. And Anscombe, again, her main argument is that it's always intentionally wrong to kill innocent civilians. And she said a principle she felt was violated by the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. She argued that the ending the war did not justify the means of murdering innocent people. And that's a utilitarian argument that she has. I remember talking about this in one of my Catholic social teachings in the seminary, and I raised my hand and I said, and the professor was very much against using the bomb. And I said, what about like the United States dropping a bunch of leaflets saying, get out of the city because we're going to bomb the heck out of this place very soon. And he said, you cannot expect an entire city with nowhere to live and nowhere to go with adequate food to get out of the city from leaflets. That is not reasonable to think that. My point here is, we as seminarians are thinking through this just as you are right now, right? So these are very, very good, thoughtful things. As I'm like, is there any other way we could have done this, type of thing, as we were talking about this issue in the seminary. So the events to Japanese surrender, as mentioned, you have the Potsdam Declaration from all the Allied powers coming together, demanding unconditional surrender, the dropping of the 2 bombs on the 6th and 9th of August, and then the Soviets declaring war, and on August 8th, invading the Japanese-occupied Manchuria the next day. August 15th, after the second bomb is dropped, by the way, the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary in our Catholic tradition, Emperor Hirohito announces the surrender to the Japanese people in a radio broadcast known as the Jewel Voice broadcast. If you want something of drama, read about the, I don't know what they call it, the council where the emperor and the military leaders came together to talk about what are we going to do after these 2 bombs. And it was tense. And there were lots of tears. And when the emperor finally said, we have to surrender for the sake of our country, for the sake of our species, in some sense, there were just tears, like all over the place, right, for this. I mean, let's not downplay the drama for them and what they had to go through as well. And he had this kind of, his voice being broadcast over these cities, this was just like unprecedented, hadn't happened before, to hear your emperor's voice, And for them, in some sense, it was like the voice of God, right? Telling them, my people, we have to surrender. We are going to surrender to the United States. September 2nd is the formal signing of the instrument surrender. This takes place on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. They have footage of this. You can see this easily on YouTube. It's like something out of a movie on the USS Missouri. You have troops hanging over the side. You have this ship is just packed full of soldiers and admirals, and so you have MacArthur's there, and you have the representatives from Japan. This is one of these things where the Japanese sort of the foreign minister comes, and the guy's wearing like a black, absolute pristine sort of suit and a top hat that comes on, and then you have all the military surrounding this table where they signed this formal declaration to end the war there with MacArthur. So that sign, the papers are, of course, all over the place, saying that World War II ends. This is actually May 8th, I think. Germany surrenders there. By the way, it looks like a priest there, doesn't it? He looks pretty happy there with the American flags all over the place. So we have millions pouring into the streets, not only in May, in London, New York, Times Square, and other places, but also on August 14th and September 17th. There's lots of jubilation and celebrations that the war has come to an end. And they're very, very grateful for this. And it's a new chapter for the United States and for the whole world. Of course, I have to have the iconic picture for you next. There, we've all seen this before, the iconic photo of the U.S. Navy sailor kissing the woman. And many times you think this is a nurse, but it's actually a dental assistant that's there amongst the jubilant crowds in Times Square. It's published in Life magazine. It's kind of a symbol of victory and the end of the war. That's there. By there, where there's all this debate is, who is this woman? And, this, that was me, type of thing. They were there. So just this, one of these kind of iconic photos. Just kind of got a couple of photos here in closing in terms of the gratitude and the relief and thanksgiving for our troops in giving us the freedom and the country that we have today. We owe our World War II veterans and all our veterans a debt we can never fully repay, rightly so. Mary Beth.
So what happened with the emperor? If it was an unconditional surrender, what were the conditions?
For them, how about we get in it? Is it okay? We'll get into that. Can we get in the doc? You said that mean the Cold War and stuff like that, kind of the reconstruction of the country. Does that sound good? Just because of time? That's a good question, though. I just want to get a couple lessons before we take just a short break here in terms of lessons. World War II, I mean, I think for yourselves, first of all, you think about what has impacted you most for this course and what you have learned from that, right? For me, I have my things, and you have your things as well. And I'll just give you a couple points. One is kind of a vigilance against extremism. And one of my things is, I tell this to the seminarians, one of my great concerns right now in our country, and this isn't a left or right thing, I worry about extremism, and I really don't care if it's on the right or on the left. To me, when you start to move away from the center, going left or right, number one, it gets weird, and number two, it gets dangerous because it becomes more and more irrational. That's there. And I tell our seminarians, the guys who are going to be priests, and the Archbishop's standing there right with me, and he agrees with me 100%. I said, gentlemen, as our country gets more and more weird, like going extreme left and extreme right, your job as a priest is not to go this way or that way. Your job is to stay in the truth of what God has revealed, what the church has taught. You are to be a good listener, and you are going to be a good, keen, astute observer of what's going on, but you are to stay with the church. The only thing you are to be extreme in is love and self-sacrificial love of Jesus Christ. Your own political opinions should not be the lead on your homilies and in your bulletin articles and everything. Jesus Christ and his self-sacrificial love ought to be the first on your lips, right? And that means that's going to rub some on the right the wrong way and some on the left the wrong way. We've learned after 2,000 years to never, ever, ever get into bed with politics. It's a disaster for the church 100% of the time. And that doesn't allow us then to critique blind spots of parties that's there. So I always pull back from any camp of any political party, because at the end of the day, we are disciples of a different kind of kingdom, the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ. That means we're going to agree with some things with each party in our own particular country, and that means we're also going to be critical on both sides of the aisle as well. And I remember saying that, and the Archbishop was like absolutely 100% because he was right there with me. And he said, and you don't have to verbalize every thought and every political inclination in your heart to your congregation, nor should you. Why? What's the point of that? It's not about you. It's about Jesus Christ and being a servant of Jesus Christ. That's there. I always tell people, even in our own congregation here, maybe you haven't noticed, one of the things I never do, I tell our people to do, we're just not going to mention the president's name, either current or past, in our congregation because it just causes so much emotional. So I said, just say political leaders. That's it, right? Because it's just become so toxic, right? Whether it's the current one or the one before us or the one before that. It's just, let's just stay with Jesus, right? And just pray for the government and pray for our president and pray for this and just stay with Christ himself. So as things become more extreme and atrocities, the Christian has to be vigilant, and the Christian has to know his tradition or her tradition and never become complacent and have the courage to speak up when we see certain things that violate the truth of what God has revealed. The failure of confronting aggression, the failure of appeasement shows the appeasing an aggressor can be more dangerous in the long run, and democracies must be prepared to resist aggression when it first appears. Certainly appeasement and diplomacy was kind of like Chamberlain's kind of number one thing, but you have a Churchill who says you can't negotiate with the devil, and you can't negotiate with evil, and you can't negotiate with an alligator that ultimately wants to eat not only you, but it's going to eat itself as well. You have to stand up for it, and you have to fight against it. And sometimes you just have to put your heels in the ground and say, no, we're not going to do that. And we're not going to negotiate with you on that particular thing. I'm sorry. We're going to fight you on this one, right? So sometimes that's just prudence of knowing when to do that for the sake of your own culture. The dangers of isolationism, the war demonstrated that isolating your country and saying that only our country matters and we're not going to be part of the sort of international fabric can be quite dangerous. And the United States tried to be isolationist for quite some time, but they found out you can't be that forever. It's a global community, right? And you're going to get pulled into certain things. One of my biggest things from the course is the impact, the negative consequences of ideology. Ideology is just a warped vision of reality. It's having glasses that are blurry, that you put them on, you're like, I can kind of see, and I kind of can't see, and it's blurry, and it's like in the Gospels, I see men, but they look like they're trees walking. So I can kind of see, but it's a kind of myopic vision that is blurry of a reality. And sometimes that can get really blurry of reality. So what ideology can do is it can lead people, because of a blurred vision, it's not the truth, to commit unprecedented atrocities in the name of that ideology rather than of the truth, such as the Holocaust, such as some of these horrifics like the Bataan March, or such as these like fire bombings of just innocent cities that are happening there. So you can take a very, very cultured nation like Germany, which had all these Nobel Peace Prize winners and everything, and it can turn into a barbarous nation because of ideology, because of barbarism. And then we also saw how National Socialism and fascism and communism are kind of a cancer of the mind and a kind of virus in the soul. Because it's a ideology, it rejects evidence that's right in front of you that conflicts with your worldview. And as we also saw, they tend to play and leverage emotions, such as fear and anger, and creating a kind of strong sense of identity and scapegoat those who are outside the so-called belonging group. They also promise a utopia. They, as the doc's going to talk about, a kind of an eschaton, which just means the end times, the messianic era, with Christ as king, with the Blessed Virgin Mary and all the saints, where there's kind of a communion of happiness and joy. They don't believe that in the afterlife, and they try to bring that afterlife into this world, and they say we can create that here and now. They can immanentize it. They can make it now right in front of us. If we do X, Y, and Z, we can enjoy this kind of messianic hope and joy and love and peace. We can create a beautiful omelet, the best omelet with all the fixings in it, but there's only one caveat. We got to break a lot of eggs to get there. And the problem is, what they end up doing is they continue to break egg after egg after egg And then people start to say, gosh, there's a lot of death here, there's a lot of blood here, and there's a lot of freedoms that are being limited, and there's a lot of pain. Where the heck is the omelet? And those in charge will say, just wait, we got to crack some more eggs, and we'll get there. And so the promise keeps happening, and the omelet never comes. So the church has always said that omelet, as much as we want it, it will never, ever, ever, ever happen in this life. God hasn't willed it that way. You're always going to have suffering. You're always going to have pain. You're always going to have injustices. We do the best to fix them. But the ultimate fulfillment of the human heart and the glory of God and the communion or communal of saints with the Blessed Mother, that is only going to happen in the eschaton, in the next life. In any ideology who says, well, that's a bunch of hogwash, we can create that here and now, they're lying to you. And the church says, you're just lying, and we're just going to call you on it. You can't create it. We can do the best we can to make it better. The Second Vatican Council said we should, but we're never going to achieve it, period. And so these are false hopes and false dreams and false utopias that they are promising us. And unfortunately, the side effects of it are that millions and millions of people are going to die because of it. So I just want you to realize that. Maybe that's something you take away, is say, you can't create that here. It's just not possible. Additionally, we saw how propaganda is very powerful. We saw how folks like Joseph Goebbels basically is a master at it. He's a master at rhetoric. He's a master at psychology. He's a master at using media, whether it's film or newspapers or youth groups, that he's able to shape public opinion with an ideology, with a masterful craft that was unprecedented. I mean, we just haven't seen something like that in a long time. And he used a very beautiful gift that God gave to him in a very evil and sinister way. And it's extremely unfortunate, right? So again, this is that kind of brilliancy of the German mind to use a God-given gift in a way that was sinister for their own ideology, and to really shape the hearts and minds of thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the German public. We also saw from World War II that peace is certainly not a right. It's certainly, but rather it's a gift that you have to work at, and it's fragile. That peace is something you have to work at, and it's, the classic saying is, if you want peace, work for justice. But it's, you never take peace for granted. The peaceful times we've had in the last 50 years, give or take, is a gift from God. This is almost unprecedented in history. I think we thank God who lived in this kind of, I just the other day, I thank God for living in this particular time. And we have a very blessed time in this particular country. Now, things are getting harder, but nonetheless, compared to other periods of history, we've lived in a very, very blessed time during this particular time in history. We also saw from World War II, it's a study of human nature. Boy, human beings have a capacity for tremendous evil and tremendous good and heroic love. We saw there's potential for savagery. For example, in the Holocaust, we saw some horrific things there, the Bataan Death March, these fire bombings. But we also saw extraordinary acts of courage and resiliency and sacrifice for the sake of our country and for the sake of our God. The human being has this amazing capacity to be tremendously, tremendously good and tremendously, tremendously evil as well. Ordinary people are forced into very difficult circumstances and impossible choices, and there's a complexity to human nature and a complexity and a mystery to this sort of human experience under extreme duress. And I, for me, one personally, as I never say, well, if I was in that situation, I would do this. I have no clue how the heck I would act. I simply pray for the grace of God that I would act right. I would never be presumptuous to say that I have more sort of gas in the tank than I do. So I'd never be presumptuous of how you would act in some of these situations. We talked about the power of propaganda and scapegoating. And oftentimes as a human race, when things aren't going well or a country, we tend to put aside an individual, a group, or an entire sort of ethnicity to say all of our problems are because of you. And if it weren't for you, we wouldn't have these particular problems. That's very, very dangerous stuff, right? So when there's problems, the proper way to say is, how have I contributed to this? What have I done wrong? And how can I help? That's the proper response of humility versus saying, there's nothing wrong with me. It's because of you and your fault. So we see scapegoating today quite a bit as well. Also, we saw that basically from World War II, post-World War II Nuremberg trials, that even in war there's rules. In our classes in the seminary, they just pounded into us that even in war, there's still a scaffolding. There's still a morality. It isn't just a no holds barred and there's no more rules. There are still rules. There's still a morality even in war. If somebody surrenders and waves their white flag and says, I surrender, you don't get just to shoot them, right? You can't just come in with troops into a village and just say, all right, all of you, we're going to put you all in the church here, shut the doors, and then shoot you all. That's what the Nazis did in some of these French villages. They would just take the entire village and just shoot everybody. Those are war crimes. Those are wars against humanity. Those are innocent people. Those are non-combatants. There's certain things you just can't do, right? And so there should be an accountability for that kind of action. We also saw there's kind of a human rights, that we have basic human rights as a human being. There's certain things like putting people in gas chambers or experimenting on twins and children like the Mengelas of the world. These are horrific crimes, not just of war, but against humanity. These are crimes against humanity that are there. We also learn from a Catholic perspective that we have taken it for granted that as human beings, because of Genesis 1:26, we are made in the image and likeness of God, that there's a reflection of God in our very being. And as the doc's going to talk about, we're created with a dignity, a kind of inherent worth, a kind of uniqueness in terms of who we are and the way we're made, a uniqueness to us, like a fingerprint. And that even though we're fallible and broken and we're struggling, we're still redeemable and we're still lovable. And there's something within us that God still loves very, very much, more than we love in ourselves. So there's kind of a way we look at human beings. And even an enemy, we say there's still a goodness in that person by the fact that they exist, right? I may not agree with you, and I may argue with you, and I may have to fight you for self-defense. But nonetheless, I'm still going to treat you in a certain way, right? Even as a prisoner of war. These Nazi racial theories and euthanasia programs that they were in the eradication of gypsies and Jewish people and some priests, these are antithetical to our Catholic faith. And the church's resistance to these ideas emphasize the sanctity of every human life, and we're just emphatic on this. You know, I have to say, when I talk to sometimes Protestants, they'll say, yeah, I disagree with you guys on some things, but I will have to give you something. Boy, you guys are really on the side of life. I mean, you're kind of the sole voice out there a lot of times. It's pretty unbelievable. Like, you're always raising your voice when innocent human life's being taken, right, or threatened. You know, so like a little child in the womb, that's a baby. That's a human being, right? It deserves, if it doesn't have a voice, we're going to be its voice for it. The person laying in the hospital bed with cancer, struggling, full of pain, grandma and grandpa, where the doctor says, you know, it's probably better that you don't exist. And your family's like, yeah, it's better that you don't exist. Here's a little pill, a little shot we can give you. We'd say you don't get to do that, right? You don't get to kill somebody, an innocent human person. You know, right now is the political stuff with around the immigration, wherever you stand on that. Even the bishops just came out and said, okay, you know, like you still have to treat them with dignity and respect. If you're going to put them in their own country, you can't treat them like they're quote unquote animals. They're human beings. They're our brothers and sisters as well. And they deserve the sacraments, and they deserve to be loved as well. So that may not be their country, but there's still a kind of dignity and respect. They're not less than you. They're not an enemy than you. That's there. So there's a kind of way we treat somebody as well, with the dignity and respect that's there as well. This is all sort of Catholic sensibility around the human person that's there. As Catholics, you know, we learn there's grave dangers as political ideologies, as I mentioned. Any type of ideology that says removes God and puts the state or the proletariat, the Workers' Party, as the ideal vision, or this is what we're working towards, this is your new God, so to speak, these are idols. This is a violation of the first commandment that's there. By the way, in the West, as human beings, we can be kind of creative, and sometimes that ideology of like the state for fascism or the party for communism in the West, it tends to be what? Not just materialism, but it's the individual. I am the ultimate end. I am the one who determines good and evil. I am the one who determines who I am, and I can create myself. Man, woman, neither, whatever. I am my own person. And in some sense, I am my own God. And you don't tell me what to do, and I can do whatever I want, as long as I don't, quote unquote, hurt you. But I can marry who I want, I can do what I want with this person, but I am the one who determines good and evil. So in the West, we've taken that ideology of state or Workers' Party or the sort of Communist Party, and we've just transferred that to the individual, where I am now my own God. And so we have just people with their own deities walking around. It's basically an ancient Egypt or an ancient sort of Babylon or Assyria that has just come into our culture and just kind of transformed itself into like our own sort of polytheism or many gods, and now we are those gods. That's what's happened, right? And the church just says, no, you're not. God is God, and you are not. You're a creature, period. Which means you are subject to certain rules and to the Lord and a certain ethic or a morality or natural law, sort of the way that God has built the world, and you have to not only pay attention to it, but you have to be obedient to it as well. And so that's where the rub's happening right now, right? Versus I'm God versus God is God and you're not. Pope Benedict said the 21st century, it's going to be, and he was smart, he said the battle, every age the church has a battle, right? The Reformation was around what is the nature of the church and her sacraments. Early church was around the Trinitarian controversies and the Christological controversies. Now the battle is, what does it mean to be a human being? There's a huge battle. What does it mean to be a human being? And what does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God? And he was prophetic. He said it before it even happened. And it's playing out right in front of us. What does it mean to be fully alive, fully human, and fully happy? And what does it mean to glorify God? And that's what's happening. And it's going to take a while. We're all going to be dead, and there's going to be battling of it. For us, it seems like it's forever, but it's going to happen for a while. The church will work it out, and the church is going to come to its conclusion based on what God has revealed to us. What does it mean to be a human being? Is the great battle we're seeing right in front of us. We didn't talk too much about just war doctrine, just that you know that the church has a kind of doctrine around wars, of when you can engage in war. And I'm not going to go over the criteria because of time there, but the point is that there are certain norms, moral norms, of whether when you attack another country, and those norms have to be there for it to, quote unquote, be a just war. We also saw, from a Catholic perspective, many Catholics, clergy and laity, engaged in truly heroic efforts to save the lives of others, especially Jews and soldiers. And we saw how they, in Europe, hiding them, our Jewish brothers and sisters in monasteries and convents, in the Vatican itself, creating false documents, right, baptismal certificates, establishing escape lines and routes. Somebody asked this morning, was that just a couple of priests? No, that was like a whole secret network, the church working behind the curtain of a play, so to speak, of trying to save as many as they possibly could. We saw the actions of heroic Catholics on the very tip of the spear in terms of love. Maximilian Kolbe, Edith Steiner, St. Teresa Benedict of the Cross, who said, I'm going to give up my life so that others can live. And I'm going to give up my life to show the primacy of love and the primacy of self-sacrificial love and God's love, that even in the midst of this dark place, this very dark place, I will be a candle, a baptismal candle, and the flickering of that self-sacrifice is going to flicker and reverberate from Auschwitz and beyond. So that even in the midst of darkness, tremendous darkness, there's always a possibility of being a flickering candle of light, of grace, of love to others. One of my favorite sayings, I was complaining when I was first, after graduating from Notre Dame, and I was like, man, this place is so dark. It was like downtown Minneapolis. It was a financial place. All they talked about was money and making more money. And I was kind of going on and verbally vomiting all over my good friend. And he quoted Mother Teresa, and he says, don't curse the darkness. Light a candle. Light a candle. Stop complaining. Light a candle and be a candle. They need Jesus. And so be positive and talk about something more about maybe love and relationships. And there's more to life than just making more money. I just never forgot that. It was 25 years ago. I still remember the conversation. I remember I was standing when he said to me, stop cursing the darkness. Light a candle. Be optimistic. It's beautiful. It's a Mother Teresa quote. You don't have to complain. Complaining doesn't do much at all. Start to do the positive and be a candle for others. These saints remind us of that. We also saw very complex with being neutral. You're going to take some hits. It's the stance that Pius XII took. You can agree or disagree. It's the one that he took. He said, we're going to work behind the lines, and we're going to try to salvage as many as we can secretly. We probably are not going to give as many clear, public, strong statements of condemnation as people would like against these grave injustices. But, Pius, he's gone to his eternal reward. He has to face the Lord for that, but he did everything that he could. By the way, they opened up the Vatican archives in the last 5 years, and the Vatican said, we don't have anything to hide. You can read as much as you want, right? And more, he's becoming vindicated more and more based on his actions that what he tried to do with Pius XII. Saints emerging from this violence. The war produced many saints. Some of those we know canonized at the altar. And as so many of you have shared with Doc and I, these hidden saints, the little quiet saints, the things that have happened on these battlefields and at home, and your own family members, and the stories that you carry with you. And these are sacred stories. There's just thousands and thousands and thousands of these stories, which we're going to be unpacking at the end, at the final judgment, and seeing all these beautiful stories that happen that God knows. We also saw the cost of removing God. Priests who served during the war observed that it was firsthand lesson in what happens when God is removed from life, strengthening their own determination to make God supreme in their lives and to take God to the troops and to others. The idea here is that when you try to remove the Lord, you eclipse God, the Son, from our society. Anything goes. I mean, this was Nietzsche's position. He would say, if God is dead, God is dead was his famous line, but he said, if God is dead, let's start acting like it, which means there is no morality. It's just simply the Superman. The guy who has the most power wins, and you can't even judge him. He just wins. There's no morality. You can't use him good or bad, right? And that's a very chaotic, horrific society. Nobody wants to live in that. I use the analogy that if you're playing chess and then your friend says, hey, you know what, it'd be kind of fun, let's just take the chessboard out. And he just takes the chessboard out. Now you can do whatever you want with the pieces. I don't know if that's a good thing. And then he just takes all your pieces and just topples them all over and he goes, what are you going to do? There's no chessboard. You can't even say you can't do that. Why not? What are you going to do to me? Type of thing. Again, going back to the movie Schindler's List, the one woman, Helen, who is the kind of maid to Amanguerth, she's like, I can't figure out the rules. Like, one guy gets shot for just walking with a sack of potatoes, and this guy, this doesn't make any sense. I'm trying to figure out how to live. And he's like, there are no rules. It's just might. It's just passion. It's just however I feel. I'm just going to shoot you, right? So it's just living in this horrific, kind of blasé, dark place where you're trying to figure out what are the rules for me to live. Nobody wants to live in a society like that. There are significant consequences from moving our Lord from society. Then it just becomes the powerful against the weak. And the weak are going to get hosed 100% of the time. The vulnerable are the ones who get hit first. Again, the moral vacuum, we talked about that. We talked about ideology as a cancer. Last couple slides, I just wanted to show a slide or two that I thought were just inspiring. As a priest, at least, bringing the love of Christ present in the Eucharist to our troops who needed it and wanted it, and it's what sustained them, is so, so, so beautiful. I just love these guys are kneeling down, and God only knows what they're going to be entering into in just in those few moments right after that reception of Holy Communion there. And then just a thank you. Thank you personally for just taking time, especially on a snowy evening here, to be with us this evening, whether in person or live stream. My hope is that the Lord has touched you in some way in the course, that you're grateful for our troops, both past and present, of what they give, the daily sacrifices that are made not only by our troops, but amongst all of their families and our society as well. And the hope is that in seeing their lives and what we learn from, you yourself reflect and say, what kind of disciple am I of Christ? And what kind of sacrifices can I make for our Lord and for his church and for our country as well? So the idea here is that there's an inspiration that you have here and a gratitude. So your heart's full of gratitude and you thank God for the country. It's a beautiful country, has its struggles, but a beautiful country given. But also, what can I do to help out in terms of making this a better country, and to thank our troops and to thank God for all he's given for us. Okay, we've been going for a little over an hour. How about we give you a little 10 to 15 minute break? Does that sound good? You look like you could use it. You went through war to make it in here, right, with the snow. So you can stretch, you can just breathe, get something to eat, use the restroom, check your email, do what you got to do, and then the doc will get up and he'll finish it off, and then we'll have a little bit of question and answer afterward. Does that sound good? Okay.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? All right. Well, thank you guys. I'm going to echo what Father said and say thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm actually really impressed that we have this crowd here because the roads are terrible, and thank you for coming for the finale. It's hard to follow Father because he finishes the atomic bomb, but also delves into all the reasons why we thought this was an important series of talks, all the lessons to be learned. And the one thing I want to reinforce, Flannery O'Connor, a great Southern Catholic writer, one of her lines she said is, I tell a story because a statement would be inadequate. And I think the issue with history, why a lot of people do not find history as appealing when they're going to school sometimes, and there are great history teachers in high school and in college, they're up against a wall because there's so much material to convey. But when history is kind of portrayed as just facts and dates and just immense memorization without a soul, if it's just data and not a story, it's no wonder people sort of step away from it. And yet all of us want a story. That's why we love literature. It's why we love great films. And that's why we love history, it's a story, it's a narrative. So one thing I wanted to say, I just want to say a few things before we get into the slides, and I promise not to keep you too long. First of all, Father and I are really blessed to have many people come up to us between sessions or at the end of sessions who have experiences with family or themselves, but mostly family, parents, or what have you, with World War II. And I have learned so many lessons along the way. And I remember I was giving a talk on Truman years ago, and a man came up to me just kind of nonchalant between the first hour and the second hour, and he proceeded to tell me that he was enlisted as to work on Guam, and he would inspect bombers that came in. And he knew every aspect of the bombers, the hatches and the bolts and the rivets and all sorts of things. And he said he remembers one time late in the war that a bomber came in, and he said there was something very odd about it because there was parts of the shafts had been adjusted, and he said some of it had been welded shut, and they were going to be opening it and so on. And he went to his sergeant. He said, "There's something going on with this bomber." And the sergeant said, "Don't worry about it. It's going to be fine." He said, "I never forgot the name of that one bomber, and it was the Enola Gay." And so here I was with a guy who basically inspected Paul Tibbet's Enola Gay before it left and dropped the atomic bomb. And that's kind of the guy, oh shuck, by the way, and you're like, well, that's a good story. So what I try to tell people is, and I've had people have copied me, somebody copied me something that I think it was their dad or their uncle, upon stumbling upon Dachau, what they saw, and wrote it all down. She made a copy of it for me. Somebody just gave me something this morning about their, I think, 5 lessons from his time in the European Battle of the Bulge and so on, and passed it on to me. But those stories, that's living history. It's living history. And so what I would commend to all of you is ask your parents if they're still alive, write these things down, tell your kids, because story is what makes history come alive. Remember, Harry Truman once said, the only thing new in the world is the history you don't know. The only thing new in the world is a history you don't know. There's a narrative. We got to come back to what is the Catholic narrative, and narrative and story matters. The narrative the Catholic faith promotes that is different than every other ideology and totalitarian movement out there is the narrative of dignified, fallible, redeemable. Dignified, fallible, redeemable. Dignified, you are valuable ineradicably. They can never take your value away because you're a child of God. And the Catholic faith builds around that very truth. Like Father was saying about the devotion to protection of life in all its forms and all of its seasons. Dignified, fallible, but we're broken. From the time of the fall, we carry sin with us, and therefore we cannot we can't build the Tower of Babel and arrive in the heavens. We cannot immanentize the eschaton. Remember, that was Eric Vogelin said that, and William F. Buckley popularized it, saying you can't immanentize the eschaton. And everybody goes, what does that mean? It means to render present paradise, to render present heaven on earth. Because as Father said, you do that in the process, you do break a lot of eggs, you have no omelets, you kill millions, you never arrive at paradise, okay? And so we carry with us our fallibility, which means we will never be able to achieve the utopia we think we can because we're tainted in being fallible. And finally, redeemable, that's the hope. That at the end of the day, we're recoverable, right? We're recoverable through the blood of Christ. And we're reminded of this every time we look at the corpus of Christ's body on a crucifix, that it's not us that earned our way into heaven, it's God that stooped down for us, gave his life, and redeems us. If you want to understand where ideologies go wrong, it's going wrong in the narrative, and one of those three, if not all three of those areas. So dignified. The Nazis thought that they were supra-dignified because they were the right race, the right blue eyes, blonde-haired, they had the right pedigree and all this kind of stuff. And the Jews and the Aryans and the Gypsies and so on, they were without dignity, completely valueless. Fallibility. There's a notion that we are blights on the earth. There's the environmental movement that thinks that human beings are just parasites on the creation. Okay? We're just so fallible, so broken, nothing good comes out of us in that respect. And then there's ideologies that believe we're infallible. We can't do wrong. It's the Nietzsche Superman type of a notion. And then there's the redeemable, the warping of the notion of what it means to be redeemable. That we are either unredeemable, which means nihilism, or we can redeem ourselves. And that's the utopian temptation, the Tower of Babel. So if you remember the Catholic narrative, dignified, fallible, redeemable, and you remember that fascism, communism, National Socialism, modern secular fundamentalism, and all the other forms of isms out there, they warp any one of those three parts of the Catholic narrative. So just keep that in mind. I also wanted to quote Chesterton. If you don't read G.K. Chesterton, you should. And don't start with orthodoxy, because you'll be like, what is he talking about? And I read that for the first time on the beach in Mexico, and I said, I have no idea what he's talking about. And then years later, after a lot of other reading, I came back to it, and I said, this guy's a genius. But what I would start with is read his quotes. Just go online, go to the Society for G.K. Chesterton, and read some of Chesterton's quotes. He's brilliant, insightful, and will always keep you thinking about things. But one of his lines he said, which applies to the notion of standing up for that which is dignified. He said, there will be Diocletian persecutions, there will be Dominican crusades, there will be rending of all religious peace and compromise, or even the end of civilization and the world before the Catholic Church will admit that one single moron or one single man is not worth saving. You might say, what's a moron? Well, that's a kind of a derogatory term nowadays. That in those days was the notion that a person who had mental challenges, intellectual disabilities, special needs, all this stuff. They just called them a moron. It was just sort of the description of it, of that person. But what Chesterton's saying is the National Socialists and the Communists and others looked at those people as sort of life unworthy of life, especially the Nazis, the unfit, the undesirable, the subhumans, if you will. And Chesterton said that's not who the Catholics are. It never will be. So again and again and again, throughout any degree of ideological crusading that's going on, his father said, the Catholic Church has stood up and spoken loudly in defense of this life when other people haven't. And I came as a Protestant who had a lot of gripes about the Catholic Church. And I'll tell you, when I was on the outside looking in, one thing I could not dispute was, man, they champion life. Just like Father said, they go to the wall over life, and it's true. Rene Girard is a Catholic philosopher who I think might have spent some time at Notre Dame. I think maybe. I could be wrong. But one of the things he talks about is a cycle of scapegoating. And there's something called mimetic desire. And I want to be brief about this, but God recognized that we human beings have jealousies and envy, that we are so prone to jealousy and envy that he gave us 2 commandments about it and not just one. So you look at the 10 commandments, number 9, number 10, don't covet your neighbor's wife, don't covet everything else. But he has to say it to us twice because we want other people's stuff. And the cycle of scapegoating that Rene Girard talks about is mimetic desire, which is I see something somebody else has or is and I want it. So maybe you could say I want to emulate it. I admire that. They're a role model for me. It usually doesn't go that way. The next thing it goes into is mimetic rivalry, where I want that or I don't want them to have it. And then it moves into scapegoating, where we start saying that person's the enemy. We try to destroy that person in the name of being jealous of what they have or wanting to take what they have. And it ultimately devolves into bad treatment. And then there's this catharsis among people who all bandied together and said, this is the bad person. Don't we feel great that we punish them, that we kick them out, that we put them through the Holocaust, whatever. And then we start all over again. But the thing about the Catholic faith is we believe truly that this mimetic cycle that leads from mimetic desire to mimetic rivalry to scapegoating gets upended with Christ. Because Christ is the perfect God who comes down and breaks the cycle of violence. And instead of saying, I'm going to come thundering at you in lightning bolts and destroy all of you who crucified me, he said, let it end with me. Let me forgive them. Father, forgive them, for I know not what they do. So again, it's completely paradoxical that there's a forgiveness aspect that helps to upend or disrupt the cycle of violence, violence, violence. So I just wanted you to think about that. And Rene Girard is a very good person. He can be challenging at times because he's complicated, but it's very good. Lastly, before we get into the slides, as dark as this has been for us to spend all this time with these terrible stories, we think of the Second World War as being a war of Joseph Mengele, right? Joseph Mengele was among the worst people, a doctor who's in the camps experimenting on twins and doing these horrible things. But we also have to remember the Second World War is also the war of Kolbe. That immense, as Father said, immense heroism and saints emerged out of the war just as much as horrible things happened and horrible people came out of this. And as I say to my medical students when I'm teaching them, we get obsessed with suffering, but we're world blind to grace. And when you start looking, when you really start looking, and by the way, people share stories again and again and again of little graces that are so Christ-like and so pristine, and yet so easily overwhelmed by the power of darkness that we miss them. But if we kind of look for grace, it's amazing how powerful it is. So whenever you're reading about World War I, World War II, the Cold War, etc., the dark stuff becomes very obvious. But look for those moments of profound grace and insight that points towards Christ or towards Christ's narrative, because it's there. We risk missing it all the time. So because it's getting late, and because everybody's tired and it's snowy out there, we're going to finish up with basically this is the advice I give to the Edina High School kids when I teach them on Churchill. I said, if you want to learn, if there's 3 lessons I want you to walk away with from the Churchill story, it's these three things. Know the truth, stand up for it, and when you get knocked down, get up. So I'm just going to give a couple of quotes that reflect on these 3 points because they apply to the story of the Second World War. So know the truth. Charlie Hill was a diplomat who worked in the State Department under George Shultz. He worked under Kissinger for a time. He worked in the United Nations. And he was asked by the administration at Yale to come and give a seminar to seniors in international relations at Yale, who were going to be ambassadors and State Department members and so on, to give a seminar series on the United Nations and the working of world structures of international government. And Charlie Hill, who had a lot of experience, came in to see these fourth years, he's about to graduate students at Yale, and he was stunned at how much they didn't know. He went back to the administration and said, these kids are ill-prepared for navigating the world of diplomacy. And so out of that came Charlie Hill and John Lewis Gaddis, who we'll talk about him during the Cold War. He was a biographer of George Kennan, and then Paul Kennedy, another international scholar, historian. They formed a class called the Grand Strategy, where they basically educated, I think you could apply to this, but I think it was 30 kids a year. Pre-med, you could be anthropology, you could be international relations. You applied, 30 got accepted, and they got taught about the nuances of international diplomacy, and then they did things called murder boards, where they'd have to sit down in a scenario where someone was the Secretary of State, someone was the ambassador to China, someone was the President of the United States, and they got scenarios thrown at them, and they had to make decisions, and then real-time scenarios would come back at them, and they just got hammered again and again. In real time, how do you solve problems on an international level? And the kids loved it, but they were terribly stressed out. And it's like, this is the way it is. And you have to integrate your knowledge of data, but also your reading of human nature and context. And this is Charlie Hill's comment. He said, we have changed our education in the last 30 or 40 years so that students are really not being taught history. They're not being taught what it was that got us here. History gave way to being taught issues. And issues are something abstract. They're just out there. They somehow just show up, like climate change. Let's have you study climate change. Let's have you study the Afghanistan war and just the nuances of this contained battle that's kind of going on here. That is the fundamental reason why we have this seeming obliviousness or ignorance about the way the world has got to be managed in order to make everything else work well. If we don't know that, then it's all going to fall apart. And you might be like, why are you talking about this? because history is teaching people context. What led into this, what's going on now, and what will happen if we do X, Y, and Z coming out of this. If all you care about is a circumscribed set of issues here that you can just take this and set it over here, pull all your money out of here and set it over here, and not think about the ramifications about what came into this and what's coming out of it, there's going to be a disaster. And that's why, again, if you want to really work in the world of politics and diplomacy and international relations, you have to apprehend history and you have to apprehend human nature because it's complicated. And he's saying a lot of these kids are coming into this with black and white eyes, that this is kind of categorical and easy when it's completely complicated. And you need to know your data, but you have to understand and appreciate context. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which we'll talk a lot about in the Cold War, he was imprisoned in a gulag by Stalin for writing a letter critical of Stalin. He was just a lowly soldier. And he wrote the famous Gulag Archipelago, which got spirited out of the Soviet Union. It made waves across all the Western world because people were still arguing the Soviet Union is a paradise, and he revealed how bad it was. Awful. It's a horror show. And he said, the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. This line shifts inside us. It oscillates with the years. And even within hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained. If you read what I think are some of the greatest writers in all of history, Shakespeare, Dante, Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, part of their success is their characters are like us, which means they're good and bad. They're right and wrong. They're complicated. They're vexing at times. They do something they shouldn't do, then they don't do something they should do, and so on and so forth. The story is all about what it means to be human. So we can't just say these are the good guys with the white hats and these are the bad guys with the black hats. It's complicated, and that's part of the narrative: dignified, fallible, redeemable. Richard Feynman, the physicist, once said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. And Columbia professor of history who wrote a great book called From Dawn to Decadence, Jacques Barzins, someone said to him, man is a rational animal, and he cut him off, said, capable of reason. And that's a big distinction, right? Because rational implies we're always rational, but we all have blind spots and biases and shortcomings and things ignorances, so to speak. And we can be irrational. Back to Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn wanted to make an impression on the power of ideology. If you remember Macbeth, the story of Macbeth is, here's this soldier who wins this big battle for King Duncan of Scotland. He's being heralded as great and so on. He happens upon 3 witches who say, you will be the next king. And Macbeth hears that and kind of goes, I don't think so, but that sounds kind of nice. He goes back home and tells his wife, Lady Macbeth. She says, that sounds great. When's it going to happen? And they look at each other like, not really sure. Then they start saying, let's make it happen. And they start killing people. And it all goes terribly wrong, right? And in the end, there's a dozen people that die under Macbeth and his wife, okay? Solzhenitsyn says this, Macbeth's self-justifications were feeble, and his conscience devoured him. Yes, even Iago was a little lamb too. Iago is the bad guy in Othello, who's just pure darkness. All of Shakespeare's characters, the bad guys and the good guys, they have a little bit of good, a lot of bad, and vice versa. Iago is completely dark. The imagination and spiritual strength of Shakespeare's evildoers stop short at a dozen corpses. Ideology, that is what gives evil doing its long-sought justification and gives the evildoer the necessary steadfastness and determination. That is the social theory which helps to make his act seem good instead of bad in his own and others' eyes, so that he won't hear reproaches and curses, but will receive praises and honors. In other words, with ideology, it'll excuse anything. And there was a quote another quote of Solzhenitsyn's that he said, why did Macbeth stop murdering at a dozen and Stalin didn't stop at 1,000,000? And he said, Macbeth had no ideology, but Stalin did. And if you're doing something that you think is in the name of a good cause, the horrible things that you will do is frightening. And we have the 20th century just to give us evidence for that. Flannery O'Connor once said, the truth does not change according to our ability to stomach it emotionally. Now, I don't know if you were raised by a guy like my dad, but whenever I did something that I was wrong and he corrected me and I griped about it, he said, "Todd, the truth hurts." And I'm like, "Yeah, it does. Thanks for saying that." And he was right. Winston Churchill said, "United wishes and goodwill cannot overcome brute facts. Truth is incontrovertible. Panic may resent it, ignorance may deride it, malice may distort it, but there it is." Again, Solzhenitsyn. Over half century, when I was still a child, I recall hearing a number of old people offer this following explanation for the great disaster that had befallen Russia. Men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. Since then, I've spent well nigh 50 years working on the history of our revolution. In the process, I have read hundreds of books, collected hundreds of personal testimonies, and have already contributed 8 volumes of my own towards the effort of clearing away the rubble left by that upheaval. But if I were asked to formulate as concisely as possible the main cause of the ruinous revolution that swallowed up some 60 million of our people, I could not have put it more accurately than to repeat, men have forgotten God. That's why this has happened. Benedict XVI, when he was Joseph Ratzinger, and when he gave the homily before the 2005 conclave that ushered him in as Pope, he gave what was famously called the dictatorship of relativism homily. And this is an excerpt. And he says, "How many winds of doctrine have we known in recent decades? How many ideological currents? How many ways of thinking? The small boat of the thought of many Christians has often been tossed about by these waves, flung from one extreme to another, from Marxism to liberalism, even libertinism, from collectivism to radical individualism, from atheism to a vague religious mysticism, from agnosticism to syncretism and so forth. Every day new sects spring up, and what St. Paul says about human deception and the trickery that strives to entice people into error comes true. Today, having a clear faith based on the creed of the church is often labeled as fundamentalism, whereas relativism, that is letting oneself be tossed here and there, carried about by every wind of doctrine, seems the only attitude that can cope with modern times. Basically, relativism, there is no truth. It starts that way, right? There is no truth. Who's to say your truth is any better than mine? Can't we both agree on different things and both be right? Well, the answer is no, you can't. Not if those things are truths. And what happens is if you establish a morally relative world, which can never exist because everybody's going to get upset if they get cut off in traffic, let's be honest, right? You're not going to get upset if there is no truth because that person just said they're more powerful than you, they're faster, whatever. If you set up moral relativism, you create a vacuum, and very, very quickly, ideology invades that vacuum. So he said, we are building a dictatorship of relativism that does not recognize anything as definitive and whose ultimate goal consists solely of one's own ego and desires. He goes on to basically say that the church's one criterion is Christ. And he says we should aspire to friendship with Christ. There is a standard, and that standard is Jesus. Okay, that was know the truth. Stand up. Edmund Burke said, when bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fall one by one, an unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle. Now, this has been popularly changed to a more apocryphal quote, but we like this. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. So we each have to kind of ask ourselves, what is my particular calling? What's my vocation? How am I to make the world better? How am I to serve God? It's very, very unique. But the answer isn't do nothing. I don't know if you guys can see this picture, but everybody's kind of giving the Sieg Heil, and that guy sits there with his arms crossed. It's kind of like, be that guy, right? Pastor Martin Niemöller was in a concentration camp, and he wrote at one point, first they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. And they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist, and the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. Everybody know who this is? Right. If we did one generation lower, everybody like, who's that guy? I'm like, it's Gregory Peck. It's Atticus Finch. I've tried to be Atticus Finch. I'm not very successful at that. Courage is when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway and see it through no matter what. Atticus tells his daughter Scout about this trial that's doomed. A ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. I like a man who grins when he fights. And John Paul II says, put out into the deep. I mean, it sounds cliche, but the world needs you. The world needs Catholics who believe what Father is telling us every Sunday, who believe what the Scripture says, who believe what the encyclicals are writing about, who believe what the sacraments represent, who believe that prayer makes a difference, who believe that we have a vocation. The world needs you because the criterion is hanging on that wall. Christ, right? That's the criterion. All right, finally, when knocked down, get back up. Theodore Roosevelt famously gave the man in the arena speech. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold, timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And I think sometimes we have a tendency to want to go to what is safe, but that's not what we're called for. We're not called to be tepid. We're called to be on fire. I said this to my daughter recently when she had kind of grousing about something. Something didn't go right. Chinese proverb, fall 7 times, stand up 8. Never give in, never, 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 never. Churchill went back to Harrow, the high school he graduated from. By the way, he was not a good student. He was a great English student. If you might have recalled, I might have said this to you before, he said, I wouldn't whip schoolboys for many things, but not learning English, I'd whip them hard for that. Latin drove him crazy because the Latin teacher says, now, Winston, when you're addressing the table, O table, you need to use this conjugation. He said, but why would I ever talk to a table? Why would I address a table? So it drove him kind of nuts. Anyway, he obviously landed on his feet with his career, and he came back to Harrow and said, don't be discouraged when things aren't going your way. Pursue greatness, no matter what gets in your way. Never give in. Never, 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 never. Hilaire Belloc says, the church is a perpetually defeated thing that always outlives her conquerors. Briefly, if I said read Chesterton, Belloc is the other side of Chesterton. They were such good friends that George Bernard Shaw created this monster with 2 heads that he called the Chester Belloc, Chesterton and Belloc. Chesterton debated George Bernard Shaw, Clarence Darrow, Bertrand Russell, and he got into fiery debates, but he was likable, and they all liked each other at the end of their debates. Hilaire Belloc, on the other hand, was a brawler, a pugilist. He made enemies when he fought with them, and his enemies did not like him when it was all done. But the thing about Belloc was he was brilliant, and when he put pen to paper, many people still think he's one of the greatest essayists of the 20th century. So if you're interested in reading great Catholic essays, read Belloc. We are all worms, but I do believe I am a glowworm. This is my last slide, and I just want to reinforce. There's a world out there saying to each one of us that we're worms, that there is no God, that life is meaningless, that our appetites should be slaked, and that's all there is to it. But we know better. We know better. We know deep inside there's something more to this. We know we are dignified. We are ineradicably valuable because we're children of God. We know we are fallible, that we carry with us a brokenness that we can't heal on our own, even though we try and we get saved to some extent through the sacraments. But we also know that we are redeemable, that God has not just cast us down here into perdition, never to be rescued again. That's an amazing narrative. It's a narrative of our Catholic faith. It's a narrative that Father preaches every Sunday. It's a narrative you should live every day by. And if you embrace that narrative, you will live differently. It's, as Benedict XVI once said, those who have hope live differently. So don't curse the darkness. Light the candle and bring it to the people all around you. Thank you.
See. Okay, we have a little bit of time left in this morning. We did the last 15 minutes or so. We had people ask questions or just give a comment and just a little bit of interaction. I know it's snowing and you probably want to get home soon, but any questions, impact of the course, just comments, anything from you at all that you want to share? You can ask myself or Dr. Todd. We're happy to answer it together. Anything at all just on your hearts there before we head out for the evening? Because I think it's been a great course for us. Anything at all? Yeah, Dave, you have something for us? It's a good rhetorical question. Yeah. I feel like we're at a nightclub here with Susan.
So with Winston Churchill, I don't understand why, well, I can understand but why he didn't survive in his role very long after the war.
Yeah, it's an interesting nuance of British politics that an election can be decided to be called. They can call election. There's certain frames of time in which you can't go without having an election, but the leading party can call an election when they feel like their stock is high, or they realize the coalition that's supporting them is starting to falter, so they need to do something to change the narrative, okay? The Conservatives in the summer of 1945 said our stock and Winston's stock is at an all-time high. And let's roll, let's call for an election. Churchill is over in Potsdam meeting with Stalin and Truman. Franklin Roosevelt's died, it's now July. He is over there for 7 days, meeting with them, talking about Japan, talking about the post-war envisions and so on and so forth. The elections happen. He has to go back to be present for the elections, and he loses. And it wasn't just a loss. It was a devastation. It was one of the big three conservative losses in the 20th century. And Clementine Churchill said to Winston, well, Winston, it may be a blessing in disguise. Well, he says, well, if it is very well disguised. And the thought is that people really liked Winston. Now, mind you, when he was campaigning, he made some comments about Clement Attlee, who was a Labor Party member, which was kind of flirting with socialism. And he basically said to run Clement's policies, he's going to have to probably resort to a Gestapo. And that fell pretty flat. It was a little bit too soon for a comment like that. So that didn't go so well. But the other thing was many people believe that people had been tired of all the shortages and the rationing and so on. They thought that the national government led by Churchill and the Conservatives was probably good for war, but that the Labor or Liberals would do better for the peace. And so they turned Churchill out and the Conservatives out. He was pretty devastated because he thought it was a referendum on him. As a matter of fact, the king felt so bad for him. Remember, the king who didn't like him very much at first, and then he decided he was going to knight him. So they called it the Order of the Garter. And Churchill, who would become Sir Winston Churchill down the road by becoming a knight, he refused it. He said, I can't receive an Order of the Garter from my sovereign when I've received the Order of the Boot from his people. That was his line. But just so you know, many think it was simply because people were not fond of the Conservatives, though they were fond of Churchill, and they thought Labor and Liberal would be more attentive to domestic needs as opposed to what the Conservatives would. Just so you know, the redemption story for Churchill is he would be elected as Prime Minister again from 51 to 55. And ultimately, he died in 1965. So you're absolutely right. It's a story that you're like, how on earth does this happen? Churchill was lionized to the day he died. He was a national hero, not to the communists and to the hardcore socialists, but he was in many respects, he was a national hero to England. It's just that the Conservatives that had fallen a little bit out of favor.
You guys have given a lot of book recommendations over the course, and I wonder if you could summarize or give the top like three, whether it be for World War
I'll have Dr. Todd do that, but somebody asked this morning about with all the lists, can we just get like a one-page list maybe of the top over the course? And did you say you were going to do that, Dr. Todd? Okay, he'll do that for you. So do you want to do 3 of them right now, or just
Well, so this is gonna be hard, right? Which of your children do you love the most? Okay, so quickly, for Churchill, who I think is, the thing about Churchill is it's not just darkness. There's wit, there's insight, there's courage, there's fallibility. The best single volume written about Churchill is Andrew Roberts' Churchill Walking with Destiny. I highly recommend that. Released in 2019. Now, if you want to go a little bit longer, I'll just throw this out to you. William Manchester and Paul Reed have a 3-volume work. And, as you might know, if you're really interested, Winston Churchill's biography is the longest biography in the history of the world. It's Guinness Book of World Records. It's like 7 volumes long. Okay, we won't go into that. Second thing is you should read 5 Days in London, May 1940, by John Lukács, which is all about the pivotal moment where Churchill has to decide, do I cut a deal when my cabinet is going against me? Dunkirk is terrible. The Americans are isolationists. Nazi aristocrats are sympathizing, and Hitler's running amok in Western Europe, and we're in big trouble. 5 Days in London, May 1940. If you want to get a visual of this, Darkest Hour is as close as you can get, but the book is outstanding. Hitler, 2 volumes, Ian Kershaw. And volume 1 is called Hubris, and volume 2 is called Nemesis. Outstanding, terrific. And then Stalin, Stephen Kotkin, Kotkin. He's written 2 of 3 volumes on Stalin. Brutal, but really brilliant. And then finally, Conrad Black has a FDR biography that's very long but very good. And David McCullough wrote a great volume on Harry Truman. I promise you I will have an exhaustive list of books sent, but these are amazing stories.
in that list, can you kind of categorize, like maybe the better ones, good? I suppose you would not put the not good ones on there. Yeah, okay. Any last questions, guys, or comments at all? Yeah. I like your sweatshirt, by the way. It's Irish. Yeah, the very devout Catholic, or the ones that are thrown into there, the Ratzingers of the world, right? So, like, what do I do with this, with my country moving in this direction with this ideology, which is at odds with the church and stuff, and it's the soldiers. So, as we mentioned in the presentation, very complex. Oftentimes, what do I do in a situation like this? As Dr. Todd mentioned, the Erwin Rommels of the world, who are like brilliant, wonderful, sort of strategic, in terms of being commander, but then at the same time realizing, what is this? Hitler's crazy. How do I get out of this? What does this look like for my family as well? So very, very difficult situations for them. Sometimes we have to say, we're going to leave this to you, Lord, who knows the heart of what's going on inside this person and the relationship that you have with them, if that makes any sense. Whereas our judgment's on the outside of what things look like. Does that make any sense? Do you know any, Doug?
I'm sure there are. I don't know of them. What's very interesting, I think we have to remember, is that when the war is over, it's not like everybody just flipped the switch and we're against being Nazis. I mean, there's people, I have patients who have German relatives who the grandfather was in the 1990s saying, well, Hitler was right, he predicted X, Y, and Z. And so the interesting thing is how the ideology kind of goes underground, because it's just not pragmatically, you're not capable of really letting it surface up. So there was a whole, and by the way, don't forget that a lot of the Nazis that rat-lined out of Europe ended up in Argentina, and there's a thriving Nazi community. I mean, successful business-wise, manufacturing, all this stuff down in Argentina. So again, I don't know of any kind of documentaries and so on and so forth, but what I'd say is there was a thriving part of the culture that, notwithstanding how bad things got, destroying things, it was in ruin, they still believed the ideology was right, and they carried it all the way to their graves.
Yeah, yeah.
Hitler and the Nazis rose to power in such a short amount of time, through, as you said, through the effective propaganda that they had, but yet they had limited amount of, social media at that time. And today we're seeing kind of a rise of, socialism a little bit in this country, and yet there's, a tremendous amount of social media. I just want to get your thoughts on where you think that's going, or how effective can that be?
You have any comments on that for social? I don't know where it's going. It is interesting to see a sort of wing of politics going in that particular direction, especially amongst the young people. Part of it is, I think that, as the doc said, it's a sad that if you don't know history and sort of what these ideologies in terms of their ramifications and the consequences of them, it is kind of scary, actually, to be a part of that party and then repeat the exact same thing over again, right? I think it's our job is to teach history and say there are consequences to ideas and to sort of movements. And a lot of times there's like 100% track record for sometimes like this National Socialism that never brings a sort of happiness that it promises that's there. So the church has a duty, and I think those who know history that don't want to repeat it have a duty to raise their voice and say, we have deep concerns about this. Deep concerns about this. All right, we're at 8:30 here. How about a little final blessing? Does that sound good? All right, the Lord be with you. Through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, of the angels and saints, including your guardian angel, St. Therese and her family, may Almighty God bless you and grant you safe travels on the way home to be with your families, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. You may go in peace, and we'll hang around for just a little bit. If you have any questions, you want to come up and ask us. Yeah.